Hey everyone, Senate Bill 451 passed the House today and will go back to the Senate for concurrence. It's a significantly different bill leaving the House than it was coming in here. There's no education savings accounts, charter schools have been limited to just 2 schools in a pilot program. But one of the biggest and most concerning changes for me is they've added a provision that would require every school to have a police officer present. Now, people have been asking me, why am I so concerned about that? Don't I care about student safety? And the reality is, yes, I do, and this is why this is so concerning to me. People have this perception that schools are increasingly violent and increasingly dangerous, but the data bears a very different reality. Over the last 30 years, there's been a very consistent decline in violent incidents in schools. They're actually much safer now than they were even 30 years ago, and during that entire time in between. Of course, there have been some really high-profile incidents of extreme violence, of extreme tragedies, and that's certainly something we want to prevent. But in a number of those cases, there were actually police officers present, and they were not able to stop those tragedies from happening. So there's really no reason to think that they'd be able to stop any future tragedies from happening as well. And in reality, researchers who've looked at this have found that there's been no change in terms of reported incidents at schools where police officers are present versus schools where they aren't present. So again, there's no real data to back up that police are going to make schools any safer. Now, there are some researchers who actually looked into this. They went to schools, asked students if they felt safer with the police there. And even then, students didn't report feeling any safer with police present than they did in schools where police were not present. So why is this so concerning? I've had a number of people tell me that they work in schools where police officers are there. They've got great relationships with students. They interact well with the students. They're a friend, they're a peer, they're a mentor. And that's great, that's fantastic. But that's really not the police officer's role. In fact, that's a role that's really meant for counselors, for mentors, for peer support. And we could be funding those sorts of roles, and those are people who can be able to be better trained to help students when they are having some sort of crisis or some sort of issue than a law enforcement officer anyway. So we're not getting what we want from police officers. Why is it so bad that they're in there? The flip side here is that there are a number of incidents where police tend to treat typical student behavior, whether it's roughhousing, bullying, even disrespect, as criminal. They tend to escalate situations rather than de-escalate them. There have been a number of incidents with excessive use of force. I'm sure some of you have seen videos that have gone viral where this has happened. And they arrest students. In fact, again, researchers looking at this data overall have found that schools that have police officers are much more likely to have students arrested, to have extreme consequences like suspension and expulsion. And this is really bad. I know there are people who tell me that they want students in that juvenile justice system because that system connects them to resources and to supports. That's not the way to get kids to supports and resources. Schools should be providing this early on when they start to notice these at-risk behaviors. If we're waiting until kids are in the system, it's too late. Because once kids hit that juvenile justice system, they have a much higher rate of dropout. They have a much higher rate of going into the adult criminal system. So we don't want kids going into that juvenile justice system. We want to identify them early and get them mental and behavioral health counseling early on. Now, the other problem with police officers is that they're not particularly trained for school environments, particularly for students with disabilities who may sometimes act out or may act in different ways. And in fact, the data bears this out too. Students with disabilities and minority students have a much, much higher disparate contact rate with school police officers than students who don't fit into one of those two groups. So for all these reasons, it's really problematic. Now, on top of all this, the price tag just for putting a police officer in each school without any special training is $40 million. $40 million. And if we were going to do this right, if we were going to put the police officers in and make sure that they've got the right training in de-escalation, in terms of trauma, being trauma aware, in terms of making sure that they understand how to deal with students with disabilities, if you're looking at all that training, it's going to be significantly higher than even that $40 million price tag we've been told about. Now, you could just imagine how much West Virginia schools could do with $40 million in terms of providing counseling, support, peer mentors. This is a wrong-headed policy, and I urge the West Virginia legislature to reject this as we look at getting that Senate Bill 451 across the line.